skip most of it.
All right.
Um, so I think that they mechanically function in ways that almost identically map onto each other. And I think that even further, you can draw a pretty strong corollary between, say, for instance, God being the law of identity, like the necessity of that person of the Trinity necessitates the law of identity. God is God, right? We see this represented in the Bible where he says to Moses, I think it was, I am that I am, right?
Right.
That's it's a clear cut on, it's not propositional philosophy, but it's as close to as you're going to get in biblical terms of saying the same exact thing, I would imagine.
Yeah,
And
you've
I think,
made a correlation between the Trinity and the laws of identity. I get it. Yeah. Um,
well, say the Father would be correlated with the law of identity, and the Son associated with non-contradiction. So as soon as the 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 being of the Son was, it necessitated a new and independent law to distinguish it from the Father, equal but codependent, in perfect unison and support. Uh,
yeah, yeah. And the law of
and
excluded middle, you said, is uh, what was it? The law of excluded
uh,
middle was it?
yeah, I would associate that with the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of the Trinity,
Right.
because it is often said as the thing that helps guide us to truth and knowledge.
Mhm.
Um,
Can I
and
ask a
and I
question? Do anybody here do you have children?
Yeah, five of them.
Five?
Hmm.
I have three. All right.
So
So
to answer your question,
sorry, yeah.
not that you're really asking a question. I know you're just trying to make yourself heard, iconoclast, and I do understand where you're coming from. Um, I do think that there is a correlation that can be made there for sure. And that's kind of a pattern of reality that is just something that um, manifests in different ways. It manifests in the laws of logic. It manifests in other ways. It manifests in the the family. The three in terms of father, mother, and children.
There's five children. It's a lot.
A lot of cultures have recognized the importance of the three, the dynamics of the three.
There certainly
So,
seems to be something there, doesn't there?
of course, yeah, there's a pattern that's going on, and you can see it in the basic framework of consciousness, self
Hmm.
consciousness, subconsciousness, and perhaps something that is above consciousness or spiritual awareness, super
Super
consciousness.
consciousness. Yeah.
Yeah,
You can see it represented in the triune ontology of man, body, soul, spirit.
right. So in that way, we can say that this pattern of three, which is the Trinity and also the laws of logic,
Well,
permeates throughout all of reality.
the Holy
And
Trinity. Don't you feel like though we should get to know each other? Myself, if I could get to know you guys well, but I understand who I'm
All right,
talking to. You have five kids, and I don't know where you're from
we're
and
we're
what
we're
you.
really not talking about that right now, bud. We're having a completely different discussion.
Yeah, we're not. Yeah, they're
I know,
having a conversation.
you
They're
say
having
just a
they're
couple words like,
you're come on, bro. You're interrupting a conversation they were having.
Malachi, I would love to get to know you in the future, but right now we're kind of like focused on something. So sorry for that. But
I'm sorry.
yeah,
Yeah, I'll shoot
yeah,
the breeze with you most times, man. It's just we're kind of right in the middle of it.
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Go ahead, continue.
yeah. So yeah, my understanding, iconoclast, is that this is a pattern that something that permeates throughout history, throughout different religions, and that's why also. trying to correlate the laws of logic with Christianity and saying that Christianity is the only framework that fits the laws of logic via the Trinity is also something that may not be entirely, sound or tight in terms of an argument, because we have plenty of other religious systems that have employed trinities in similar ways, right?
As
But
in a 3-in-1 Trinity, like a true Trinitarian
yeah, look at
nature.
Vedanta.
Okay.
It's similar.
Hey, look,
Similar
that's fair.
concept in Chinese, like Taoism as well.
I was telling Kirkos I just got off the phone with somebody that's from I went to his wedding. It was they believe in one. What is it called? Kirko, can you fill me in? Judea? No, not Judea. What the hell is it? What do they call it? They used to come to door to door and try to sell their religion.
Bro, you're bringing the Jehovah Witness thing back up again.
Jehovah, yeah. Right? So
Yeah,
it's almost the same thing, but I think I looked it up and
the ancient Chinese traditions were
one
indeed,
God instead of three, the Holy Spirit and so that's the only separating difference besides what I saw.
Yeah, they were indeed monotheistic, and they also had Trinitarian views. But anyways, the point is, Iconoclast, that although these are patterns that come down in various ways. Oh, hey, A1, I can hear you, man.
Yeah. Ajax.
Jehovah's a very interesting character.
The point is that we can sense patterns of all these things throughout history, but we cannot ultimately define them, or we certainly can't confine God to the laws of logic. So
That's what I've been saying, right?
Okay. When to say confining the laws of God to the laws of logic is kind of humorous to me, and I'll tell you why. So I'm not mocking you in any way. Like for instance, when you say that to confine God to the laws of logic would be akin to saying that God must be God or God is, right?
Well,
That's the way
confine God to the laws of logic would be to say something like, God must follow the laws of logic.
Can I ask one question real quick?
It's not that he
sent me a
follows
thing, and he said, "Fear
God is the source
Jehovah.
of the laws
Fear
of
Jehovah."
logic.
Does it say in Orthodoxy to fear God?
Yes, but there's a lot entailed in that. But to answer your question, Oppenheimer,
I don't think we should fear
God is
our
not
God.
the laws of logic. God is the
We
source
should
of the
respect
laws
our
of
God,
logic.
not fear our God.
Oh, you fear Old Testament God.
I don't mind pause for a moment, Malachi. Go ahead.
You fear Old Testament God.
Go ahead, Fletcher.
Well, like God created the laws of logic. Okay, so God is the source of the laws of logic, but God is not the laws of logic.
Let me ask you this. Do you think that when we say that he created them, do you think that he created them in the same sense uh, as he created, say, um, material things or other metaphysical concepts like love? Or do you think that these things like logic and good or morality were just being because God is? It wasn't like an intentional act of creation, like the way Genesis would describe it, right? At least the way I understand it. It's just part of his nature, so that because he is, good is, because God is, logic is, That is to say that to constrain God, quote unquote, is why I find it humorous, is is akin to saying, uh, uh, okay, so to constrain God to the laws of logic would be to say God is. I mean, that's really all that the laws of logic are saying. And I think that the only way we can know what is and what isn't is determined by God because he is the source of all truth and knowledge. So he, by definition, determines these things. Like it's just part of him existing. Like it's a spillover effect because his presence exists. Good
Hmm.
exists,
I
light
agree
exists,
with you, Oppenheimer.
morality exists, logic exists. They just are because he is. It's not that he's constrained by them; they're
But
part of
how
him.
can you comprehend there all these desert father writings? How can you comprehend something that you have no knowledge of? Because you don't even know about it. So you're trying to know the mind of God. And I hear all the intellectual banner on here, and I mean, you all baffle me. You all got some good words, and like you, Fletcher speaks eloquently when he reads from the Desert Fathers and the Philokalia and all that stuff. But what I'm saying is, like, we're all a piece. We're microcosms of. We're all. Everybody's a piece of the creation, and you're trying to separate yourself from something, and like he's something far away. It's inside you, right?
But fear. Do you like that word, fear? I just don't like that
I mean, what's
term.
the fear? Death?
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
mean,
Well,
that
it,
everybody's
I'm
afraid
not
of
even
death.
it
sure how
reminds
this
me of.
is.
A1.
Listen, I had
And
my
you get
my
real
I
religious
feared
when
my
you get ready
father,
to
right?
die.
Hold
Everybody
on a
gets
Well,
real
second.
religious. They pray to
Hold on a
God.
second.
Fucking
Malachi.
somebody's gun
I
to your head.
feared to get an ass whipping from my father. I don't want to
Malachi.
have to fear to get that
Malachi,
from God.
Malachi.
can you slow down a little, Malachi, so that we can not talk
A1.
over
I'm
each
not
other?
even sure.
I wanted to address you and say that you're absolutely correct. And that's actually what we're diving into right now is the fact that we can't know God. We're talking about a method of approach that is something that
Respect
comes
God, not fear God. I hope
something.
if I come there, I think I.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and mute Malachi. So what we're talking about right now, and I'm sorry, Malachi, but I warned you. We're talking about the very thing that you brought up, A1. We're talking about the fact that we can't know God.
Right. So you're reading the old text from people that are wiser than we are, and that's what I'm talking about. It's an amalgamation of a lot of lifetimes that save down this knowledge, right?
Yeah.
We are the database. Human beings are. And before the computer and VHS and like cassette tapes where you could store media on cellulose, there was like written tradition. And if before
Yeah.
that they carved it in the side of a damn obelisk or a pyramid or something. You got
Lots of
go
places today still have oral tradition.
and I mean, that's the oral tradition because it can't and you carve it in rock, it's gonna stay there forever. That's how that works. So you can rewrite history and all this stuff, and you don't even know. Everybody's got to approach their own enlightenment is their own path, and you meet teachers at certain pinnacle points in your life when you're meant to meet them, and either you make a decision to go left or right, and then that ultimately defines like what you're going to be as a person, who you hang out with, and all that stuff. So what you're all talking about is like camaraderie and spirituality on how to be a better person. You don't really need to like search what God knows because it's inside you. You're a creation of Him, and everybody's got different abilities and everything. And when you collaborate, great things are possible. Great minds come together and you can like achieve the impossible. That's God. It's like each individual little piece is a puzzle
I,
piece thing, and you're all looking for God. And
totally agree
everybody's
with
the
you.
puzzle. You can't see the forest for the trees because you only got one piece of the puzzle.
Yeah,
That's the best way to
I
explain it.
totally agree. And that's why we have to step back and assess the situation and not jump to conclusions, right? That seems like, well, Fletcher brought up the perfect word earlier, receptivity. And that's what the divine darkness is alluding to. It's alluding to a state of receptivity where we're able to take in more information.
Right, because he said right before that on the previous page that an excess of knowledge or an excess of light, destroys this ignorance.
Yeah, being too smart
that is
is
required
bad.
to approach him.
Being
Well,
too smart is bad sometimes because you overanalyze everything and you're not being true to your spirit, which is the way you were meant to be. So other
Right.
avarice and greed and lust and all these other different things come into play, right? And you got to be strong enough to fight that off.
Well, and
When you get rich,
there's
Yeah.
this notion of balance and proportion, right? Like the Trinity, no one part of the Trinity is greater than any other part of the Trinity. And all things proceed from the Father, though. Yet they're all co-equal, consubstantial, and co-eternal. And
three
so
is a
in
construct.
Codependent.
man, in this fallen state, that order of subordination of like the everything is subordinated to the source, the Father. All things proceed from the Father through the Son and through the Holy Spirit. So there's this movement that is it's disordered in our fallen state, and when the passions are active, either the carnal or the intellectual usurps the spiritual and becomes dominant in the personality.
What if you apply
that reflection of the
thermodynamics?
Trinity is not like a
What if you apply thermodynamics to spiritual? Like nothing can be created or destroyed. It's only transferred in matter. Energy conservation. Like thermodynamics overlaid over top of spirituality. Look
Like
at that.
when you're in the ocean and you just float. When you're
No,
still.
no, nothing like that. But yeah, I guess if that's the way you want to hear it.
Well, because like they're getting, he's asking the question: does Dionysus, the Areopagite, does he admit the synthesis of these two ways, the cataphatic and the apophatic? Is it possible, moreover, speaking in general terms, to oppose the two ways by dealing with them on the same level, by putting them on the same plane? Does not Dionysus say time and time again that apophatic theology surpasses cataphatic? It goes beyond it because cataphatic is all about defining and concepts, and including concepts of logic or even the origin of logic.
And
It's
then
all that is
go back to
known and
catharsis.
not all that is unknown.
It goes back to catharsis and words. And I'm not getting
right now.
Catharsis.
Hold
It's
on.
a transformation. It's called a transformation, as the catharsis is the root of that word, right?
You're running over the conversation, bro.
I apologize. I'll shut up.
Which page are you on, Fletch, right now? I'm sorry, I lost where you were at in the reading.
Of the PDF, it's page 25 or 27 of the book, and we're on that Greek word catharsis, like right after that.
Okay, got it. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
One must abandon all that is impure and even all that is pure. One must then scale the most sublime heights of sanctity, leaving behind one all the divine luminaries, all the heavenly sounds and words. It is only thus that one may penetrate to the darkness where he who is beyond all created things makes his dwelling. This way of ascent, in the course of which we are gradually delivered from the hold of all that can be known, is compared by Dionysus to Moses' ascent of Mount Sinai to meet with God. Moses begins by purifying himself. Then he separates himself from all that is unclean. It is then that he hears, quote, the many notes of the trumpets. He sees the many lights which flash forth many pure rays. Then he is separated from the many. And with the chosen priests, he reaches the height of the divine ascents. Even here, he does not associate with God. He does not contemplate God, for he is unseen. But the place where he is. So he's not contemplating God, he's contemplating the place where he is.
Yeah, that's a very interesting distinction that caught my eye when I first read this. I was like, what?
Yeah. So he's not contemplating God there, he's contemplating the place where God resides.
That's Golgotha, right? It's in the skull. It's Golgotha, right? Golgotha.
Yeah. Well, sure.
I think that there's definitely something to that, Ajax. I definitely do agree with you on that. And in terms of like where that's happening in the organism, I think that yeah, there's a connection.
That's what you're trying to pin it down. It's like an electron. You can tell how fast it's going or where it's at, but you can't tell both. So you're trying to pin down the consciousness, and it's your spirit, which resides in the pineal gland and the pituitary. I'm telling you,
this darkness, which the pineal gland and the pituitary gland are created things, though. The body of anything is a created thing. And this darkness that they're referring now, while there's an as above, so below corollary, and I would definitely agree with that. That the place of the skull, Golgotha, like does correlate to the interior space of the brain. What they're talking about here is a direct experience of something that is uncreated. Like it's a.
How do you talk about something that doesn't exist?
Dude, it's seriously tricky, Jack. Like,
well, then I can go. Thought becomes reality, and if I think about it long enough, and I get enough engineers, I can build whatever the fuck I want. That's
welcome to mystical theology, my friend.
It has nothing to do with like. Oh my god.
Speaking of mystical theology, Marcus, there is a question that I was meaning to circle back to, basically to the beginning of the conversation. You mentioned something that kind of stuck in my mind, and I'd like you to expound upon it, because I think it's in line with what we're talking about. You said that the idea of the intellect and the mystical, or the pragmatic and the mystical. I can't remember exactly how you phrased it. Maybe it's realism versus mystical, perhaps. They're not juxtaposed to each other, but they're hand in hand in the same vein. Would you care to elaborate on that? Because I think I would say the same thing. I think I would also go a bit further and say that the intellect, right, like the logic and the reasoning, the faculties, the highest faculty we possess, can only go so far, right? I would consider it a foundation upon which the mystical can expound, right? So it gives you the grounding understanding of what is, so that you understand what the mystical is compared to it, or juxtaposed it. There's a difference there when you start to understand it and look into it. That's tangibly different than the foundation it's built on. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That resonates. You need a good foundation, or you can't build a house on sand. That's in the Bible, isn't it?
Right, yeah.
I brought this up to you initially because you had said something to me that seemed to be presenting like a dichotomy between the mystical and that which is more grounded, like that which is in logic. And that's why I said that to you, because I was trying to like show you that these ideas reconcile themselves and they're perfectly harmonious with each other. So in other words, rationality itself is inherently mystical. our minds, our ability to form concepts is informed by the logos, by the divine logos. We have the ability, like our ability to engage in the logical process is inherently mystical. As soon as we look at something and we are able to formulate some meaning behind it, that is the Spirit of God working within us.
Yeah,
So,
I absolutely agree with you.
yeah,
Would you say then that these things like logic specifically, let's just be blunt about like logic specifically, are then therefore divine in nature?
of course. Yeah,
Don't
Yeah.
Created by,
I
but
think
not like
it's
the other
Yeah.
way around. They don't do the creating.
The
magic in itself confines you to its rules. I mean,
the
there's
top.
more senses than your five senses. So trust your gut. A lot of times, I keep telling people this, like that first feeling, you go against it, and then no, maybe I'm just no. That's your sixth sense. It's your intuition that you already were given through your DNA and your lineage through your grandparents. Do trust that you're given a gift
Yeah.
from,
I would
and
certainly say that's
everybody
part of it,
that
Ajax, but I'd say a lot of us in here would also attribute at least a chunk of that to the Holy Spirit, right?
so there, yeah. Well,
I,
it's your divine nature that you've already imbued with. Like it's in you when you're born, and
Don't
they
rely
want.
on our own self judgment, but by God's judgment alone.
Yeah, it's a divine knowledge that it's your gut feeling, and it resides in the gut. We talked about this, your emotions and all that stuff, and that's how they can control you is with disrupting your gut flora and then making you emotional and getting in fights and like there's a whole. I'm not even going to get into that. But this is another discussion. God damn, I
So
segued. I'm
yeah,
dyslexic. Give me a break.
Oppenheimer.
But yeah, the higher mental faculties are subdued by the poisons and the vaccine or the mRNA and all these other things, stress, the higher food prices, gasoline, all that shit. When you don't have time, here's my point to these desert fathers. If I can go in a desert and just meditate my whole life, yeah, I'll be spiritual as fuck. But you gotta like pay the bills and like keep a roof over your head and like eat. I mean, you just can't just like
Well,
stop
that's why. Yeah, that's why. Like in the in that book that we were reading recently called "The Spiritual Life," and the subtitle to that is "And How to Be Attuned to It." Like it's a series of letters to a woman who lives in the world. She's like in school. She's going to university, and she's definitely involved in worldly things, and that's why she writes to Theophan the recluse. Like she has this mystical experience suddenly, and she's trying to understand what happened, and he kind of guides her through this reposturing of the mind and the heart toward the world and how to live in the world and at the same time be attuned to the spiritual life.
hey, Fletcher, was
There
that you
is
and
this
I?
chasm between, like you make a great point, Ajax, like the difference of environment and lifestyle between like these monks and like us who live in the world, right? Where, like you said, you got to make ends meet, and that requires a whole lot of attention. But in the midst of all of that, it's this posture of mind and heart that is portable. It's not like it's dependent on any location or set of accoutrement or artifacts or anything.
Yeah, it's more of a
You
mind.
literally have all of the equipment on board all of the time. It's a living experience.
I understand and resonate with everything you're all talking about, but dude, it's easier said than done. Like dealing with everyday. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
Hey, real
walking the
quick,
fine line between being a good person and not just blowing off and being a dickhead sometimes. Like, you know what I'm saying? It's like,
check this out, Ajax. I think I have
I'm
something that might
sorry,
speak
you
directly
cut
to
me
what you're
off,
talking
and
about.
I'm mad at you now because you cut me off, and it's stacked up a bunch of other shit that's pissing me off, and I shouldn't
Dude,
take that
I've
off.
got it. Listen,
And
I got
because
a cool story for
I
you. I got a cool
control my
story for you. I
mind,
think
and I
you'll
can't
like
control
it.
my temper and my emotions, then they get you into problems. I understand that totally. And carrying around that mindset totally positive every time when people like this, I just can't turn the other cheek sometimes. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah,
Hey,
You know,
Fletcher,
y'all,
was this you and I? Was this you and I talking? I'm sorry. Go ahead, Marcus.
it sounds like Iconoclast has something meaningful to say to you, Ajax.
Yeah, I think I have something that speaks directly to what you're talking about. That stress of day-to-day operations, right? I'm a dad. I got kids, responsibilities. As much as I'd love, like you said, to do the whole monastic ascetic thing, it just seems completely out of reach with reality. Like it's just not coexistent with how we live life these days for whatever reason. And I think
Well,
Fletcher
that's
made a
why.
point like this earlier in that gulf that divides, the monastic lifestyle versus today. And that's probably a bridge better built by the monastic side of things. But that's kind of a side tangent. The story, though, Fletcher, was that you and I the other day talking about the stresses of day-to-day life versus the stresses of the more meta positions and how they're easier to give up, like no longer worrying about World War III, economic
That
collapse,
wasn't me, but
pandemics.
no, I mean, I'm following you, but no, that wasn't with me.
I
Okay,
think
so real
what
quick to
made,
land this,
go
real quick,
ahead.
Ajax. Um, we were discussing, whoever it was discussing like how it's easier to give up stressing about these big, far away, nebulous, but pressing issues that we used to focus on a lot versus the day-to-day grind of, well, yeah, it's easy to depend on God for everything, but when you have negative dollars in your bank account and 5 kids to feed, it's also easy to stress about that and forget to put that on God. And somewhere in the course of that conversation, I came to the realization that, well, this is a completely irrational and unfounded stress or worry, anxiety, fear, however you want to call it, because not once have I or my kids, since I became a father, ever gone to bed without a full belly. Never gone to bed hungry, never been on the streets. I'm
Yeah,
literally
dude,
worrying about and
food's
stressing
out.
about something that's never happened. So why
Food's
am
out.
I worrying about it now?
Bread and eggs and simple shit like the basics. It's outrageous.
I'll tell you what, as soon as I came to that realization, wouldn't you know it? Now, coincidence, correlation isn't causation, call it whatever you want. I call it like a subtle little nudge. Like, hey, nice job. Like, you figured that one out. Took you long enough, kind of deal. But as soon as I
Well,
came to that realization, landed 3 small jobs, immediately changed the situation that I was previously worried about. Nothing major, life changing or anything like that, but uh, took a lot of the stress that I typically would have felt from that situation, bang, right away, relieved it instantly. As soon as I stopped worrying about it, it fixed itself.
huh?
Yeah, I mean, worry is something that you carry with you. Because you can't really change circumstances and worry about what's going to happen until it's right in front of you. Then you deal with it. You know what I'm saying? I've tried to like set down my bag of bricks, is what I call it. Like all that shit you carry in your head with you that you feel bad about what you did. Leave that alone, dude. There's enough people out there who are going to drag you down. So, what my philosophy is like, listen to my inner self, which I think comes from God or my creator. And then everybody else, if they don't like it, then they're on the wrong path, not me. I'm trying to just get along and I try to be nice to everybody and like just be a good citizen, dude. I mean, it's not hard to be a good person. Just don't rob people or rape nobody or like, you know what I'm saying? I
Hey,
mean,
hey,
smile
Ajax.
at your neighbor.
I wanna,
Say hi,
I
say
wanna.
hi to somebody, look them in the eye and kind of see what they're in. I can read somebody's soul by looking in their eyes. So if they're sad,
Yeah.
lift them up.
Ajax.
Or if
I
somebody's getting
wanna.
ready to kill me, I can tell like killer crazy eyes, and I ain't talking to your ass.
Yeah.
Ajax,
Listen,
Ajax,
Ajax. I wanna welcome you. You seem like a nice guy,
I
and
appreciate it.
basically, what I want to say to you is welcome to our server and enjoy our server.
Hey,
Hey,
and I'll try to respect you guys the way you respect me, and I won't post any dick pictures or anything like Leo.
Ajax,
Thank you.
Ajax,
Uh,
I have a story for you. Okay.
Yeah, you guys are like almost too cerebral for me, man. You make me think too much. I'm like, I just want
Oh.
I can help you with that. Okay. I have a toy car.
Uh-oh.
I like the toy car.
So
I
I'm
know,
not
I
allowed
like the
to
toy
murder
car.
anybody. Not allowed to murder anybody, and I'm not
But
allowed to.
Kirikos, my
But I
toy
can-
car is
can I
blue. What
eat your
color is your
dog?
toy car?
My
How do you know what's blue?
my
How do you know it's a car?
have a color.
Exactly. Oh man.
What's a car? What's a
Fletch,
toy?
would you be inclined to continue?
I sure
Uh,
will.
Can I add something little that's relevant to what we've been talking about?
Yes, please do.
Okay, so the initial question Oppenheimer had was, how do we merge these two realities? And it's pretty clear at the top of page 26. He says if we transfer Dionysius's distinction between negative and affirmative theology to the plane of dialectic, we are faced with an antenna and
We're gonna get to that in a second.
antinomy, which is like a contradiction,
Antimony.
antimony, which is a contradiction, which we then seek to resolve in the attempt to make a synthesis of the two opposed ways. We bring them together as a single method of knowing God. So that was like before. That was at the top or farther
that
down.
sounds like alchemy to me.
Well, that's
Well,
and the thing is that he's gonna start talking here in a second, because that's just down from where we're at right now.
Yeah.
One snap observation.
He's contrasting like Platonic thought and Neoplatonic thought with
Read
like
the rest of
this
it.
apostolic thought.
Read the rest of it, Fletch.
Is this also a possible correlatory to the relationship between contemplation and prayer, the apophatic and the cataphatic merging, working hand in hand?
No. Cataphatic and apophatic are not analogous to contemplation and prayer.
Well, okay. All right. That analogy, no big deal.
I don't think so. I mean, at least at this point, I don't think so. I mean, that subject to change upon further input. Let's find out what he has to say, because this Losky guy he's got a very sharp mind, and he's going to lay it out for us. And I don't think we're seeing all of it. Right?
I got to go to bed by midnight, or my pumpkin will turn into like a fucking
pumpkin can turn into a gremlin. No.
Okay, so get on with it.
Getting on with it. Okay, so reaches the height of divine ascents in this darkness. Even here, he does not associate with God. He does not contemplate God, for he is unseen. But the place where he is, that's what gets contemplated. I think this means that the highest and most divine of the things which are seen and understood are kind of a hypothetical account of what is subject to him who is over all. Through them is revealed the presence of him who is above all thought, a presence which occupies the intelligible heights of his holy places. It is then that Moses is freed from the things that see and are seen. He passes into the truly mystical darkness of ignorance, where he sets his eyes to all scientific apprehensions and reaches what is entirely untouched and unseen, belonging not to himself and not to another, but wholly to him, capital H, who is above all. He is united to the best of his powers with the unknowing quintessence of all knowledge, and by that very unknowing, he knows what surpasses understanding. Well, that's an odd sentence. He is united to...
And quintessence means like quint. That's the number 5.
Yeah.
The fifth essence.
Uh-huh.
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, and that's spirit. Like the four elements are essences, right? And that's what all created things are made of. And this
Well, it's a
quintessence.
quintessential, I think, is
Uh-huh.
what they're going for. It's the quintessential essence of what creates everything.
That's right. Yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
wait a
And
second. Wait, error detected. I read that word wrong. It's quiescence, not quintessence.
quiescence. So
Yes. Yeah.
silence.
So that changes it
Like
quite a bit. I
you
apologize.
acquiesce, like you give up.
It's
Yeah,
it's
quiescence
inactivity,
is to yield to.
inactivity, dormancy.
Yeah.
Okay. So essentially receptivity.
Yeah. He is
Okay.
united to all the best of his powers with the unknowing quiescence of all knowledge, so the subduing of all knowledge. And by that very unknowing, he knows what surpasses understanding. It is now clear that the apophatic way, or mystical theology, for such is the title of the treatise devoted to the way of negations, has for its object God, insofar as he is absolutely incomprehensible. It would even be inaccurate to say that it has God for its object. The latter part of the passage we have just quoted shows that once arrived at the extreme height of the knowable, one must be freed from that which perceives as much as from that which can be perceived. That is to say, from the subject as well as from the object of perception. God no longer presents himself as object, for it is no more a question of knowledge but of union. Negative theology is thus a way towards mystical union with God, whose nature remains incomprehensible to us.
Very, very profound paragraph there.
The second chapter of the mystical theology opposes the affirmative way, that of positions, to the negative way, that of successive abstractions or detachments. The former is a descent from the superior degrees of being to the inferior, the latter an ascent toward the divine incomprehensibility. In chapter 3, Dionysius enumerates his theological works, arranging them in order of prolixity, which increases as one descends from the higher theophanies to the lower. The treatise concerning mystical theology is the briefest of all, for it deals with the negative way which leads towards the silence of divine union. In the fourth and fifth chapters, Dionysius considers a whole series of attributes borrowed from the world of sense and of intelligence, and refuses to relate them to the divine nature. In the fourth and fifth chapters, Dionysius considers a whole series of attributes borrowed from the world of sense and of intelligence, and refuses to relate them to the divine nature. He concludes his treatise by recognizing that the universal clause eludes all affirmation as well as all negation. Quote, when we make affirmations and negations about the things which are inferior to it, we affirm and deny nothing about the cause itself, which, being wholly apart from all things, is above all affirmation, as the supremacy of him who is...
Can I ask a question? I don't mean to stop this, but did you say Dionysus? Isn't he the
there's
guy?
a guy named Dionysus the Areopagite, and it's not the Greek god Dionysus.
Oh, okay.
It's a
All
guy's
right.
name. Yeah. That is a little confusing, though. You're right.
Grapes and orgies and shit. Okay, not that guy.
No. Different Dionysus entirely. He concludes his treatise by recognizing that the universal cause eludes all affirmations and negations about the things which are inferior to it. We affirm and deny nothing about the cause itself, which, being wholly apart from all things, is above all affirmation, as the supremacy of him who, being in his simplicity, freed from all things and beyond everything, is above all denial. There have been many attempts to make a Neoplatonist of Dionysus, Indeed, if we compare the Dionysian ecstasy with that which we find described in the close of the 6th Aeneid of Plotinus, we are bound to record some striking resemblances. To approach the one, it is necessary, according to Plotinus, quote, to reach out toward what is first, to detach oneself from sensible objects, which are the last things, and to be freed from all evil because one is eager for the good, to go back to the beginning within oneself, and to become one instead of many in contemplation of the beginning and of the one. It is the first step in the ascent, where we find ourselves freed from things of sense and recollected in the intelligence. But it is necessary to go beyond the intelligence, since the attainment of an object which is superior thereto is in question. Quote, it is not something, but before everything, neither is it being, for that which is being has the form of its beginning. But this is formless, lacking even intelligible form. For since the nature of the one procreates all things, it does not itself form a part of them. To this nature are applied negative definitions, which recall those of the mystical theology of Dionysus. Quote, it is not something, neither is it of any kind or degree. It is not mind, it is not soul, it is not moved, nor again does it remain still. It is neither in space nor in time. It is in itself of one kind, or rather without kind, being before all kind, before movement, before stillness. For all these things concern being and make it many. Here there appears an idea which one never finds in Dionysus, and which draws a line of demarcation between Christian mysticism and the mystical philosophy of the Neoplatonists. If Plotinus rejects the attributes proper to being in seeking to attain God, it is not, as with Dionysus, on account of the absolute unknowability of God, an unknowability obscured by all which can be known in creatures. It is because the realm of being, even at its highest levels, is necessarily multiple. It has not the absolute simplicity of the one. The God of Plotinus is not incomprehensible by nature. If we can neither comprehend the one by discursive reason nor by intellectual intuition, it is because the soul, when it grasps an object by reason, falls away from the unity and is not absolutely one. It is therefore necessary to have recourse to the way of ecstasy, to the union in which we are wholly at one with our subject, in which all multiplicity disappears and the distinction between subject and object no longer exists.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
I think that's just what I said. Like, we're all a piece of the puzzle, and when we come together, it like forms a whole mosaic. And like, I don't know. I think when you explain it in these ancient, like the way it's worded, and you, Fletcher, by the way, you do an excellent job of narrating. But
well, I appreciate that. Thanks, AJ.
Oh, it's second only to like James Earl Jones or Don Monfontaine. Don Monfontaine. But anyway, it seems like they're just arguing polar opposites to me. With like metaphysics,
they're making this weird. It's a subtle distinction because these Neoplatonists were on a track that was similar, but there's a difference.
Dude, I see the parallels in like Aleister Crowley's writings. Like, it's all like hidden. There's hidden meaning in all those words. Like that, it's for there's for the layman, and then there's the obscure. You know what I'm saying? What's hidden in the word.
The key difference is in the orientation of the will.
Yeah, your will is your spirit. So where does that reside? It goes back to it resides in the heavens or in your head or above it, right? Golgotha.
Yeah, Crowley was all about the will of the self, right?
Yeah.
Well,
So-
your will determines your fate. Really,
Well, if it's pointed
That's
at
what-
God, then yeah. If it's pointed at God, then I suppose one has faith.
well, Crowley was told he was a beast, so he identified with 666 as the supreme beast, and then he lived it because his mind, and it gave him power because people didn't know what the fuck he was doing. He was crazy, right? He got
and
high on opium and like fucked the shit out of him, and he
by
birthed
the way,
George Bush's
you know,
mom and everything. He
all-
popped
Really
out.
quick,
Look at Barbara
Ajax.
Look at Barbara Bush.
Hold
Look,
on,
all
Barbara
the
Bush.
all the occultists. Let me just say something real quick.
They're
All the
intertwined.
occultists, you know, Crowley and whatnot.
Oh, okay, good. I heard you correctly. Alrighty.
The whole, you know, occult community, they were seeking towards something that was mystical. They were driving towards that. There's something spiritual in their aspirations, right? But there is something convoluted
Exactly.
with
And you're all choosing the path of light.
Well,
there is something convoluted with their will.
It's an ends to a mean, using your will and concentrated focus or prayer, meditation, whatever you want to call it. You focus your mind long enough, you'll achieve your goal. If your heart's behind it, because your heart is your Merkaba. If your heart's behind it and you have true focus of your will, you can achieve anything you want. And that's what they don't want us to know. That's union with God and the universal fucking knowledge that's like beamed down to everybody, like Starlink before Elon Musk figured it out. You're getting
It's
universal
they
knowledge.
don't
You
want
can
to
steal
know.
knowledge out of the universe, literally, and like have it imprinted on your brain. Everything's in the Akashic records, and I know this might be getting a little bit more metaphysical than you want to go, but what you're all looking for is already in you. I mean, you're seeking something outside yourself, and that's the only problem I see with your all's philosophy.
No, trust
See,
me.
all I could say, universal is a pretty interesting word to us. And, yeah. Go ahead, Marcus. Sorry.
Yeah, don't be afraid, Ajax. We're quite familiar with all kinds of weird stuff, right? So yeah, I like that you use the word Merkaba. Actually, I'm sure you know what that word means, right?
It's a chariot of light. Yeah, it's a
There
light.
you go.
It's an energy force field, is what I think it is. Like it protects me when I walk around.
Okay.
If it's operating right, I got to get it running. I drink too many PBRs and it starts malfunctioning.
Yeah, I like your chariot, man. Make as many chariots as you need. But yeah, I hope you can understand what we're reading right now.
No, I do, dude. I love your all's discussion, man. It's like the most intellectual crap that I've ever heard, like outside of like my friend discussions with people that are really into that, dude. It's hard to find like-minded people that are on the same page, you know, because everybody thinks you're fucking weird. They're like, oh, okay. The frogs are gay. No, they're not. How's that possible? Well, now frogs are gay. I time traveled again. Yeah, I'm sorry. We'll go back to this. Let's find God. If you can find a direct uplink where I can plug my USB into fucking God's back of his head and like he can just give me how to be the
That's
best.
what they're talking about, Ajax.
Well,
That's exactly what they're talking about. Yeah.
It seems like Mark Zuckerberg's trying to get me to put an Oculus on or something. And that's why I'm scared of y'all.
Ajax, I call your weirdness, and I raise as well.
That's a version of Terrence McKenna I've never heard of.
I call your weirdness and I raise. I like it.
Well, dude, number one, I don't gamble with my soul. So we can bet on cards or something like that, but you can't have sex with my old lady or ride my motorcycle or
Oh goodness.
Yeah, that's old biker saying. Don't ever let anybody ride your bike or fucking your old lady, because they'll both come back with a fucking rod thrown in them.
That's
You ain't
terrible.
getting on my shit. You're not getting on my shit.
So what he's teasing out, there's a subtle difference between Neoplatonic thought and Orthodox apophaticism, and they seem the same. Like when you look at the Neoplatonists and you look at like what Dionysius the Areopagite is talking about, like there a lot of people when they read that, what he's discussing here is that it seems like they're talking about the same thing. And being as we're in the West and our whole like kind of methodology of thought is heavily influenced by the Neoplatonists, it's a little difficult to separate ourselves from this Neoplatonic style of thinking and see what the difference is between that, what we're used to, and this apophaticism that Dionysius is describing. And so he's starting to get to it here. He keeps switching back and quoting, some from Dionysius and some from like a Neoplatonic source. I'll try to be more clear about that when I can tell who he's quoting. But he's contrasting right now. So he's making a separation, recognizing partial identity, but making a clear separation on the lines of like, this isn't something that's arrived at by discursive reason or by intellectual intuition, which is something that...
Well, that kind of goes back to my point. Who's got that much time to think about erroneous, like logical and like theistic, like morality and like how to be a good person and connect with God when you got all this other stuff going on? That's my whole point. I mean, it's
well,
just really...
the way I've approached it over the years is that I've built my life around my spiritual practice. Like, and to me, it's always been a bit of a juggling act. I mean, you're not wrong. Like while I was in school, it was always school in one basket and work in another basket, and then my spiritual life in another basket. Those were the three most important things to me, and it was always it was a struggle to try and balance those. And inevitably, I would always find myself pinging back to the spiritual life whenever like I felt out of balance. That's what my mind would do, and I would be inclined.
Yeah, it's the thing that's most
direction. And then my school life would suffer.
Most neglected.
I got an answer for you, Ajax, if you're interested.
Okay,
I imagine you probably find yourself often throughout the day not directly needing to focus 100% on whatever it is you're doing, right? I mean, I think anybody who does typical work would find themselves in similar situations multiple times a day, if not a pretty significant chunk of the day. So whenever something doesn't require undivided attention, if the back of your mind, you're kind of constantly kicking over and mulling over these things, I mean, that's all the time that you really have available, right? I try to dedicate as much as my time, when that's the case for me, to that pursuit. I mean, I could think about other things, cars, bikes, women's, all this other stuff. Right. Even more important things like metaphysical things like love and peace, and them juxtaposed against, happiness and satisfaction, these kind of things. Or what I believe to be the truly meaningful things is the true innocence of things and the nature of God. Trying to get to know him better. And I just constantly have that tumbling around in the back of the old noodle, man.
I like nature. I like going in nature. I think that's communion with God. I'll go lay naked in the fucking poison ivy. I'm being facetious. You're supposed to laugh.
We're doing the Desert Father laugh.
Why don't you ever laugh? Y'all need to laugh more.
Oh,
so fucking serious. Make me giggle. Like, somebody tell me something funny. You're all fucking. Oh my god. I would be in heaven with a bunch of you. Like, we made it, and you're all boring as fuck. I want to go to the temple with Capone and all them Hitler.
Dude, stop it. You're the dude to show up at the early gates.
It would be so fun to hang out with. You guys are a bunch
Listen.
of like logs.
Ajax, don't you start with me. You're the dude that's going to show up at the pearly gates with some PVR. Like, hey, this is the stuff to bring, right?
I guarantee you, Ajax, my friend, I'm laughing on the inside. I just don't show it very much, So, but yes,
Like I said, it's a
I am laughing.
Dude, you're
Which
gonna
is
explode.
another way to say,
You're gonna explode.
just another
It's
way to
like
say, you
holding
ain't that funny, Ajax.
Don't stop it. I mean, what are you doing? Hold my laugh. If it's funny, laugh. See, you're denying yourself pleasure. Like, I can't laugh. Oh.
Ajax,
I'm
you have to
wish I
tell
could.
people.
Lord. I'm sorry, Lord.
You
Well,
have to
gotta carry
literally
the cross
command
after
people.
all.
Jocularity. But forgive me,
Bro,
Lord. Show jocularity.
Gotta
bro, if
carry
you
the
have to
cross
literally
after all.
ask people to laugh at your
Explain
jokes,
Roman
they probably ain't that
Catholicism
funny.
Think it.
something called
I think it's
ejaculatory
funny.
prayer. I'm not even kidding. It's
I-
like
It's a fucking fake word too. God. It's a
Would you?
generic word.
it's like
God-. God is.
they call it ejaculatory
How many
prayer. It's an
gods are there?
actual thing.
It's not how
It's
many
not
gods. It's a generic word. If it's the Almighty One, well, pick another name that all the other ones ain't called, and the big G ain't getting it.
It's fine the way it is, really. I mean, like I can go down that rabbit hole and have before, but at a certain point, I arrived at this notion that like, okay, so I prefer the word universe or spirit or life power or whatever because I have this like sort of an allergy to Christianity. That used to be the state of my mind, and I used to protest against the word God for that
Dude,
reason. And then I started to hear about these desert fathers and see that what they were
Yes.
talking about is exactly the same as these lofty sounding esoteric Christianity notions of the same exact thing, the source of everything that ever was, is, or will be. And I arrived at this place where I was like, well, you know what? 3 letters is enough. It's sufficient. God. I mean, it has the uncanny aspect of like mirroring, the number of the Trinity as well, and the number of the letters. So I can get on board with it, and I ended up putting that one to bed. It took some time. Like at first, when I started saying God, I remember that it felt weird because I had this protest going on in my soul, where I was still in this rebellious kind of framework, where I didn't want to say God because that was a Christian word, because I didn't understand Christianity. But
I had the same hesitance with saying that I was a Christian for a while. Initially, I found myself doing it reflexively, and then I got to thinking about it, and then some doubt and second guessing, and like, am I really? Did I mean that? Kind of set in. So yeah, there was some similar hesitation on my end using that word too. I get
yeah,
it.
it's like Chris Cornell. Follow me into the desert.
Yeah.
Thirsty.
yeah, and that's why this
July.
mystical theology is so wonderful because it ties right in with all. I mean, I'm telling you, Ajax, these desert fathers,
I mean, dude, I'm not making fun of
they're
It's just like it's
they're the
boring.
occultists par excellence, dude. Like they set the bar for occultism, dude.
I'd
I'm
say the Desert Fathers at that
not-
point is
I'm
the
not
true
disagreeing.
definition of picking up the cross and going with Jesus,
yeah,
basically.
yeah,
Just in shorter terms, yeah.
no. They're
He got stuff to
like
his
what
cross.
we have over in the West that makes us protest against,
I love him.
God
I love
and,
you guys.
and things like
I
that
think I
is
get it for my
this.
sins.
It's this
Product of Protestantism.
yeah, man. It's got all kinds of underpinnings that seem to track back a lot of it to this literal interpretation of Scripture, and the whole stream of thought about what we think of as Christianity over in the West is predicated on all these notions of sola scriptura that infiltrated our entire philosophy over here with respect to Christianity. And what these desert fathers are talking about, it's a corrective, I guess you could say, to like that. It's a relinking with the tradition. What these old boys have been talking about has always been there. Like you can read writings by Saint Anthony the Great, who was like writing in the year 300, 350 AD. And then you can go and read stuff that was written recently. And, like Theophan the Recluse was in the late 1800s. And he's talking about exactly the same thing. And
I
then
wonder.
you go and read Paul Foster Case and how he talks about like the tarot and stuff like this. And there's a tradition that is there because it's written on the soul of man. And over here in the West, we think of that as like a cult or esoteric Christianity. When, from what I can tell, what esoteric Christianity is to us over in the West, Ajax, is Orthodox Christianity, essentially.
You made the connection right there. Boom.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, it's
I mean,
we know
I
it.
was
It's
thinking
got these
something.
glossy terms because it's been filtered through the occult community, right? And this is harkening back to what Marcus brought up a minute ago, a few minutes ago now, about the difference is the posture of the will. And is it my will be done or thy will be done? That's the difference between a real occultist and a puffer.
I think that's what a good way to describe it. There's definitely like a broader term, or like there's two different definitions of esoteric. I think just in this case, yeah, the Eastern Orthodox esoteric, with that, and then there's of course the occult esotericism, which is something we avoid. Basically, am I right there, Fletcher?
Well, in a way, yeah, and in another way, it's in one way I agree, in another way I kind of disagree. I mean, like you can read.
I like to
Paul-
say in this case the Ptolemite doctrine is probably in this case what we would follow more, like his chasm or whatever you call it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that these desert fathers address the same subjects in a much more not only comprehensive way but also clear way, and there's a spiritual hygiene that's embedded in the entire tradition that has been obscured, twisted, lost entirely in the occult community in the West.
Gotcha.
Can I ask a general question for those more well-read and current writings and current church traditions and so forth? I mean, it seems to me we're looking back in time and to all these excellent writings by the Desert Fathers and the Philokalia and all these other texts. Is there anything new being added currently?
Is there anything new being? Yeah, sure. There are always new writers. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's the so when we look at like secular scholarship, for example, okay, in Orthodox like understanding, we have secular knowledge and then we have divine revelation. When it comes to secular knowledge, we are still able to utilize that to make new discoveries. But as we're making new discoveries, these things aren't something new. Like they already existed. We're just now discovering them.
The ageless wisdom.
And some people I'd say would be discovering it the wrong way. Some people are discovering it the right way. I mean, but when it comes to credit, I say there's no wrong way about that. You just, whatever you're put into for a reason. So,
like when like a scientist, like whether he's engrossed in one topic and he goes down that Aristotelian like rabbit hole with his goal, his aim in mind. When he seeks those things, he's going to discover those things. Whether those things he discovers are true or not is up to those who are in Christ to determine at the end of the day, because only Christ is truth. That's why when we read secular scholarship, we're able to So by we, I'm making like a huge claim, like I'm part of the group. But when we see the writings of individuals who are orthodox, and they do delve into the study of these matters, and they do make distinctions and say we make new discoveries in the faith through the mind of the church, those are accepted as being like logically consistent with what we have. And that has to do with the web of belief, the faith. That's why if you go through and read the church fathers, and you start progressing through the philosophies and the thoughts and things like this, you see consistency.
Yeah. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, just off topic. I'm about to say I'm about to break a new world record of being up for 20 hours now. Woke up
Oh,
at
wow.
4 a.m. and yeah, life's great. Okay, continue, Kerry.
Rookie.
Jeez.
Fucking rookie. You never traded cripples.
I'm right there with you, man. I worked last night.
52 hours, bro.
We're try 6 days.
Wow. No.
Yeah, Fletch, after I hung up with you, I went out and worked in my shop until the kiddos got up.
Oh, wow. Well, I was hoping we could continue with the reading because he's getting to something that I'm curious what he's going to say.
Yeah, Fletch, I was thinking that you would really appreciate this one.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So the distinction between subject and object no longer exists. Quote, when they come together, they are one. It is only when they are separated that they are two. How can anyone state that it is other when he does not see it as such, but is contemplating it as one with himself? What is discarded in the negative way of Plotinus is multiplicity. So that was a quote from Plotinus, right? So that's not orthodox.
Yeah, that's Neoplatonism. Plotinus
Yeah.
is Neoplatonism.
Right. What is discarded in the negative way of Plotinus is multiplicity, and we arrive at the perfect unity which is beyond being, since being is linked with multiplicity and is subsequent to the one. The ecstasy of Dionysus is a going forth from being as such. That of Plotinus is rather a reduction of being to absolute simplicity. This is why Plotinus describes his ecstasy by a name which is very characteristic, that of simplification, and I don't know what that Greek word is. It is a reintegration of the simplicity of the object of contemplation which can be positively identified as the one, and which, in this capacity, is not distinguished from the subject contemplating, so namely like personage of you doing the contemplating.
Right.
Despite all the outward resemblances due primarily to a common vocabulary, we are far removed from the negative theology of the Areopagitica. The god of Dionysus, incomprehensible by nature, the god of Psalms, quote, who made the darkness as his secret place, is not the primordial God unity of the Neoplatonists. If he is incomprehensible, it is not because of a simplicity which cannot come to terms with the multiplicity with which all knowledge relating to creatures is tainted. It is, so to say, an incomprehensibility which is more radical, more absolute. Indeed, God would no longer be incomprehensible by nature if this incomprehensibility were, as in Plotinus, rooted in the simplicity of the one. Now it is precisely the quality of incomprehensibility which in Dionysus is the one definition proper to God, if we may speak here of proper definition. In his refusal to attribute to God the properties which make up the matter of affirmative theology, or the cataphatic method, Dionysus is aiming expressly at the Neoplatonist definitions. Quote, he is neither one nor unity. In his treatise of the divine names, in examining the name of the one, which can be applied to God, he shows its insufficiency and compares with it another and most sublime name, that of the Trinity, which teaches us that God is neither one nor many, but that he transcends this antinomy, being unknowable in what he is. If
There
the
you
God
go.
of,
Unknowable.
unknowable. If the
Yep.
God of revelation is not the God of the philosophers, it is this recognition of his fundamental unknowability which marks the boundary between the two conceptions. All that can be said in regard to the Platonism of the Fathers, and especially in regard to the dependence of the author of the Areopagitica on the Neoplatonist philosophers, is limited to outward resemblances, which do not go to the root of their teaching, and relate only to a vocabulary which was common to the age. To a philosopher of the Platonist tradition, even though he speak of the ecstatic union as the only way by which to attain to God, the divine nature is nevertheless an object, something which may be explicitly defined. The, whatever, how you say that word, the something or other, a nature whose unknowability lies above all in the fact of the weakness of our understanding, inseparable as it is from multiplicity. As we have just said, this ecstatic union will be a reduction to simplicity, rather than a going forth from the realm of created things, as in Dionysus. For outside revelation, nothing is known of the difference between the created and the uncreated, of the creation ex nihilo, of the abyss which has to be crossed between the creature and the creator. The heterodox doctrines with which Origen was charged had their root in a certain insensitivity toward the unknowability of God on the part of this great Christian thinker. An attitude which was not fundamentally apophatic made the Alexandrine teacher a religious philosopher rather than a mystical theologian. In fact, God is, quote, a simple intellectual nature admitting of no complexity whatever in itself. He is monad and unity and spirit, the source and origin of all intellectual and spiritual nature. It is interesting to note that Origen was equally insensitive towards creation ex nihilo, a God who is not the deus absconditus of the Revelation. With Origen, Hellenism attempts to creep into the church. This conception, coming from outside, has its origin in human nature, in modes of thought proper to men, to the Greeks and to the Jews. This is not the tradition in which God reveals himself and speaks to the church. It is for this reason that the church has had to fight against Origenism, as she has always fought against doctrines which, in striking at the divine incomprehensibility, replaced the experience of the unfathomable depths of God by philosophical concepts.
Oh boy, that was a sentence right there.
Yeah. It is the apophatic basis of all true theology, which the great Cappadocians were defending in their controversy with Eunomius. The latter maintained the possibility of expressing the divine essence in those innate concepts by which it reveals itself to the reason. For St. Basil, not the divine essence alone, but also created essences could not be expressed in concepts. In contemplating any object, we analyze its properties. It is this which enables us to form concepts. But this analysis can in no case exhaust the content of the object of perception. There will always remain an irrational residue which escapes analysis and which cannot be expressed in concepts. It is the unknowable depth of things, that which constitutes their true, indefinable essence.
Can we go back a few sentences because
Sure.
In contemplating any object, we analyze its properties. It is this which enables us to form concepts. But this analysis can in no case exhaust the content of the object of perception. Yes, yes, and yes.
Yeah, there will always remain an irrational residue which escapes analysis and which cannot be expressed in concepts.
Right.
Yeah. The unknowable depths of things, that which constitutes their true, indefinable essence. It's the mysterious particle, Marcus.
I know, man.
In regard to the names which we apply to God, these reveal his energies, which descend towards us, yet do not draw us closer to his essence, which is inaccessible. For St. Gregory of Nyssa, every concept relative to God is a simulacrum, a false likeness, an idol. The concepts which we form in accordance with the understanding and the judgment which are natural to us, basing ourselves on an intelligible representation, create idols of God instead of revealing to us God himself. There is only one name by which the divine nature can be expressed, the wonder which seizes the soul when it thinks of God. St. Gregory Nazianzen, in quoting Plato without naming him, quote, one of the Greek divines, corrects a passage from the Timaeus on the difficulty of knowing God and the impossibility of expressing his nature in the following way, quote, "It is difficult to conceive God, but to define him in words is impossible." This rearrangement of a sentence of Plato by a Christian author, who is often regarded as a Platonizer, itself demonstrates how far the thought of the fathers is from that of the philosophers. Apophaticism, as a religious attitude toward the incomprehensibility of God, does not belong exclusively to the Areopagitica, but is found in most of the fathers. Clement of Alexandria, for example, says in the Stromata that we can attain to God not in that which he is, but in that which he is not. The very awareness of the inaccessibility of the unknown God cannot, according to him, be acquired except by grace, by this God-given wisdom which is the power of the Father. This awareness of the incomprehensibility of the divine nature thus corresponds to an experience, to a meeting of the personal with the personal God of revelation. In the power of this grace, Moses and St. Paul experienced the impossibility of knowing God. The former, when he penetrated to the darkness of inaccessibility; the latter, when he heard the words conveying the divine ineffability. The theme of Moses drawing near to God in the darkness of Sinai, a theme we have already come across in Dionysus, and which was adopted in the first instance by Philo of Alexandria as an image of ecstasy, is a favorite symbol of the fathers for conveying the experience of the incomprehensibility of the divine nature. St. Gregory of Nyssa devotes a special treatise to the life of Moses.
Yes, sir.
That's a good one. In which the ascent of Mount Sinai toward the darkness of incomprehensibility represents the way of contemplation, superior to Moses' first meeting with God when he appeared to him in the burning bush. Then Moses saw God in light. Now he enters the darkness, leaving behind him all that can be seen or known. There remains to him only the invisible and unknowable, but in this darkness is God. For God makes his dwelling there, where our understanding and our concepts can gain no admittance.
Once again, chill-inducing.
Yeah. Our spiritual ascent does not, but reveal to us ever more and more clearly the absolute incomprehensibility of the divine nature. Filled with an ever-increasing desire, the soul grows without ceasing, goes forth from itself, reaches out beyond itself, and in so doing is filled with yet greater longing. Thus, the ascent becomes infinite, the desire insatiable. This is the love of the bride in the Song of Songs. She stretches out her hands towards the lock. She seeks him who cannot be grasped. She calls him to whom she cannot attain. She attains to him in the perception that the union is endless, the ascent without limit. St. Gregory Nazianzen takes up the same images, especially that of Moses. Quote, "I was running," he says, "to lay hold of God, and thus I went up into the mount, and drew aside the curtain of the cloud, and entered away from matter and from material things, and as far as I could withdraw myself. And then, when I looked up, I scarce saw the back parts of God, although I was sheltered by the rock, the Word that was made flesh for us. And when I looked a little closer, I saw not the first and unmingled nature known to itself, to the Trinity, I mean, not that which abideth within the first veil and is hidden by the cherubim, but only that nature which at last reaches to us. And that, so far as I can learn, is the majesty, or, as holy David calls it, the glory which is manifested amongst creatures. As to the divine essence in itself, it is the Holy of Holies, which remains hid even from the seraphim. The divine nature is like a sea of essence, indeterminate and without bounds, which spreads far and wide beyond all notion of time or nature. If the mind tries to form a faint image of God, considering him not in himself, but in that which compasses him, this image eludes it even before it can attempt to seize it.
That's a very nice way of describing it, a sea of essence.
Yeah.
I like that.
This image eludes it before it can attempt to seize it, illuminating the superior faculties as a flash of lightning which dazzles the eyes. St. John Damascene expresses himself in the same manner, quote, "God then is infinite and incomprehensible, and all that is comprehensible about him in his infinity and incomprehensibility. All that we can say cataphatically concerning God does not show forth his nature, but the things that relate to his nature. God does not belong to the class of existing things. Not that he has no existence, but that he is above all existing things, nay, even above existence itself. For if all forms of knowledge have to do with what exists, assuredly that which is above knowledge must certainly be also above essence, and conversely, that which is above essence will also be above knowledge."
That's kind of the point right there. That's
this is
what he's cooking, Oppenheimer?
This is very important when we look at the person of Christ and why we call it why Christ is homoousios.
Would you mind rewinding a sentence there for me, Fletcher? I feel like I might have missed something because it seems like it hit others differently.
Yeah. Okay, so all that we can say cataphatically concerning God does not show forth his nature, but the things that relate to his nature. God does not belong to the class of existing things. Not that he has no existence, but that he is above all existing things, nay, even above existence itself. For if all forms of knowledge have to do with what exists, assuredly that which is above knowledge must certainly be also above essence. And conversely, that which is above essence will also be above knowledge. It would be possible to go on indefinitely, finding examples of apophaticism in the theology of the Eastern tradition. But we will confine ourselves to quoting a passage from a great Byzantine theologian of the 14th century, St. Gregory Palamas. Quote, "The super-essential nature of God is not a subject for speech or thought, or even contemplation, for it is far removed from all that exists and more than unknowable, being founded upon the uncircumscribed might of the celestial spirits, incomprehensible and ineffable to all forever. There is no name whereby it can be named, neither in this age nor in the age to come, nor word found in the soul and uttered by the tongue, nor contact with whether sensible or intellectual, nor yet any image which may afford any knowledge of its subject. It is, if this be not that perfect incomprehensibility which one acknowledges in denying all that can be named. None can properly name its essence or nature if he be truly seeking the truth that is above all truth. For if God be nature, then all else is not nature. If that which is not God be nature, God is not nature. And likewise, he is not being if that which is not God is being."
I love how these guys put it, man. They're so like thorough.
They are.
Laying it out.
This brings me back to Romans 7:15. And Paul had this kind of mind.
He sure did. It's difficult to understand. I mean, in some ways it's straightforward, and in other ways it's completely mysterious and like they're saying, incomprehensible.
Yeah, look, I don't want to cast any kind of disparagement on the writing. I'm sure the error has to be on my end, right? And correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like it's been saying the same thing, just ever so slightly different, maybe with a tiny little new twist here and there. But is it the repetition that's the point here, or am I?
That's part of the point, and he's going around and showing how this tradition of apophaticism exists throughout Eastern theology. And he's making references to like Gregory of Nyssa, now Gregory Palamas, and tying it in with this Dionysius the Areopagite and his mystical theology that he describes.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and so he's painting. What he's doing with the repetition is painting a continuity of the tradition.
This is also pointing out why we don't hold to like absolute divine simplicity, because we can't like minimize everything to like a simple understanding.
That was sort of the basis for how he distinguished it from the Neoplatonists, wasn't it?
Like divine simplicity itself is simple, but we can't give absolutes for God.
What do you mean can't give absolutes for God? I think there's some that you can safely give. Yeah, he gives them to himself. We just agree with them, basically. So at least that's how I see it.
Yeah, but these concepts that we have, that we come up with, that we discover, we can't apply those to God.
I agree. I don't think it's possible for us to apply really anything to God outside of our attention, our love, our adoration, the things that we have some agency over, right?
Not even those, especially when it comes to like the deeper matters. For example, love. I can't say I love like God loves.
No, I'm not saying that's the case. I'm saying that the thing we can, I think, apply things safely to God.
outside of the things that he says are ontologically part of his nature, right? So, for instance, I don't think it's applying anything to God to agree that God is wholly good. I mean, he tells us this about himself. It's part of his nature. I don't think that's us applying anything upward to him or trying to constrain him conceptually. I think it's just acknowledging what he says to be true. But I do think it's possible and probably good to apply what capacity for love we do possess through our personal agency, whatever kind of will we happen to have. That's still a murky topic for me. I'm still sorting through that one, free will and so forth. But point aside, I think aren't we told to love our God? It's the highest of commands and under the new covenant. And so love thy God and love thy neighbor.
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind when you mention all that, it's second order knowledge. I don't know if that helps, or somebody correct me if I'm mistaken.
I think I gather what you mean. Like it's a derivative.
Mm-hmm.
It's not primary.
Right.
No.
The only primary, like, first principle is like divine revelation.
And the
that
simple
and
cognition.
that's like, and that's the first principle of knowledge in the Orthodox view, I believe.
Can you rewind and say that for me again? I'm sorry, man. I'm just tired. I'm not trying to be.
Yeah, no problem. This isn't like so when we look at I mentioned like anything like we would say when it comes to like cataphatic theology, it's all second order knowledge.
Okay.
Yeah.
And also we're receiving it, right? So we read the Old Testament, the New Testament. For us, like, we're reading someone else's words inspired by God.
And that's by definition second order.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's why first order would be direct experience, divine revelation, the individual. So that would be the first principle in our experiential knowledge to how we are able to make that first step to God.
I think I'd agree with you there, because absent experiencing, God revealing himself to me, that moment of divine revelation, I'm not sure I would have a grounding of epistemology for any of the second order knowledge downstream of it. I mean, I suppose it's possible to conceptualize, but is it possible to truly believe it and hold it as a justified true belief? I'm not so sure. I think it's a critical element.
Yeah, this is why this is why, like, when we look at the Roman Catholic perspective, when it comes to like natural theology, things like this, we wouldn't accept the Aristotelian logic in trying to comparatively figure out and work our way up to the knowledge of God, because
I think
can give us
some of the way there, but then you have to inevitably discard it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I would argue,
and take off the garments. This ties in with the purification that they keep going back to.
Yeah,
like there's a properness to the cataphatic method of defining through concept and so forth. I think that like maybe even has something to do with this purification process. But ultimately, that has to be discarded as well.
If I may, real quick, I think to Kirko's point that trying to soul logic or reason your way to the understanding or belief in a God, or is somehow approximating the same experience that one received through divine revelation isn't necessarily possible. I'd agree with that. I would say the same for any method that draws you to God, but absent that moment of divine revelation where he reveals literally himself to you. I don't know that the picture can be complete. I think you can get vast
Even
majority of the
then,
way there,
This
right?
is
even then,
when
it's not
we
a picture, according to
yeah.
what they're saying.
Just let me run with this for a second, if I could. The analogy might not be perfect. I concede, but it seems to me that you can look pretty much anywhere around you and see evidence of God, whether it's the divine order of the universe itself, from the macro to the micro, life itself. I mean, we see evidence for this everywhere, right? But coming to an absolute belief of faith in God, communion with God, absent Him revealing Himself to you, I don't think that's possible.
Well, and that's why they're talking about this apophatic method, because the goal is to come face to face with him.
Yeah, I mean that kind of seems like where the process of theosis would start. It's like, oh, that's an option.
Well, through grace, it's an option. It's not like something that man does, though.
Right, right. My point was to
Yeah.
say that absent some personal knowledge of God's existence, right? You're there's no ability to go down the conceptual path of theosis, which would be becoming one with that God. You first must be aware of the God in order to engage the process of becoming one with Him, I would think. It's like not the metaphorical starting line, I guess. Probably not a perfect analogy, probably not exactly analogous, but it seems to follow that in order to engage in that process, and which it seems like that's what the whole thrust of everything that we read in the Desert Father writings and in Scripture and through the church tradition is to fully engage in that process, right? And I think
Yeah.
in order to even start engaging in that process, you must first experience divine revelation. I don't see how it's possible to get around that.
Right.
The the way that we see it in the Orthodox Church is that God has to reach out to you and lift you up to Him in some way to draw you towards Him, right? That's the first step. The stuff that we're reading right now is kind of like, after you've gotten past that point where God has drawn you towards Him and you're seeking Him, this is like laying out a path right here. It's laying out a path of the apophatic method. And even though it seems philosophical in nature, the stuff that he's talking about, it's actually quite practical in nature.
Well, can I ask, when was this written?
This guy was fairly recent, actually, dude. He was early 1900s, first half of the 1900s.
Interesting.
Yeah.
He writes as if it's much older. That's really interesting. And the reason
you
I ask,
asked, and like, yeah, this is a modern writing right here.
interesting. I mean, it doesn't change my follow-up question, but it seems to me that there's really not any hard and fast lines drawn, right? These are all.
Well, there are. He was very hard and fast with the line. This is what he's getting to. I know it's a little bit wordy and lengthy, and there's a bit of repetition, but it seems like he's about this paragraph that we're about to read now. It kind of like starts to like get into that difference.
All right.
Can I, before you do that, can I clarify something? So when I mentioned natural theology, so keep in mind, we don't reject natural theology.
You need to find that for me. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, the theology, like being able to rationalize up to God through like the world and what we see and what we experience.
Gotcha.
So we don't reject natural theology. It is part of the structure, the web of beliefs, but it's not the first principle.
Gotcha.
As philosophy isn't, just as literature, like all these aspects that we have history, they don't take priority.
I agree. I agree. I would say that knowledge itself is kind of a first order state of affairs. Same with logic. Same with basically the things that comprise God's ontology are what first order things. First order thought processes and so forth are must be fundamentally grounded. I mean, they have to. There's no other source. There's no other genesis.
And for each individual, that experience is unique to him.
Right. Because each person, God draws each person to him in a special way suited exactly for that individual based on their set.
So the
Everybody
order
has their own internal metaphors and ways of thinking, you know?
Yeah.
And God already knows. God knows that perfectly for each of us.
Yep, the order of all those things is case specific to the individual.
Right.
Yeah, for me, just anecdotally, I got most of the way there. I spent 15 years running headlong away from anything Christian, anything theology, anything God, anything Jesus, looking for alternate explanations that I've been taught for the first 20 years of my life. Darwinism versus creationism, so forth, secular explanations that didn't require the existence of a God, because I really didn't want there to be one for quite a while. I was that disillusioned. And for me, all these inquiries kept leading me back to the same place until eventually, no matter which path I tried to take to find the glimmer of a hope of disproving it, or at least convincing myself he wasn't real, I would say logically or intellectually or through naturalistic inquiry, like all these different things that all inevitably lead to God, kind of led me into that same destination. There was still this stubbornness that I couldn't quite let go of, and for me, it took personal tragedy. I mean, it's a story as old as time, right? So it's like you said, Kirkos, it's as individual and unique to the person as the person is to the rest of existence, I would say.
Oh my God.
Kind of shows a personal connection with the creator, right? Specific interests, specific love, specifically curated, specifically for you.
Yeah. You look at the disciples, each disciple had a unique role in the church.
Fletcher?
Yo.
Can we stop reading these desert fathers? You know, because I'm sure that the desert grandpa's got more wisdom. Let's go there. Where are those at?
Hey, we got. Let's plan a trip. Let's go to Mount Athos, my friend.
Hey, now you're talking.
Fletcher, you said you had a paragraph to go, right?
Well, I was saying that in this next paragraph, there's some interesting stuff that he's starting to get to.
Oh, okay, I got you.
Yeah. Face to face with this radical apophaticism, characteristic of the theological tradition of the East, we may ask whether or not it corresponds to an ecstatic approach, whether there is a quest of ecstasy, whenever the knowledge of God is sought by the way of negations. Is this negative theology necessarily a theology of ecstasy, or is it susceptible of a more general interpretation?
A theology of the nations. Is that like, so I'm just trying to track. Maybe I'm foggy and tired. Theology of negation, is that implying somehow, kind of like what I just described, a process of elimination? Well, that checks out must be God. That checks out must be, I mean, what's he talking about?
No, that's exactly the opposite of what he's saying.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I'm tired.
Yeah, it's the negations. Sometime we should read some Saint Ephraim the Syrian, because he talks about the shedding of garments during this like apophatic ascent towards God. There's a shedding of all concepts. So there's no check. That's God. That's not God. That's not what's meant by negation. It's a literal be still and know that I am God. Like the intellect stops ruminating, stops trying to figure it out, and approaches God directly, person to person, and sits there still and listens. It's
by the shedding of first of all sense impressions, and then emotions, and then concepts.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Kind of in that order, actually. Yeah.
In that order. Yeah.
This negative theology necessarily a theology of ecstasy, or is it susceptible to a more general interpretation? We have seen in examining the mystical theology of Dionysus that the apophatic way is not merely an intellectual quest, that it is something more than a spinning of abstractions. As in the ecstatic Platonist, as also in Plotinus, it is a question of catharsis, of an inward purification. There is, however, this difference. The Platonic purification was above all of an intellectual nature, intended to free the understanding from the multiplicity which is inseparable from being. For Dionysus, on the other hand, it is a refusal to accept being as such, insofar as it conceals the divine non-being. It is a renunciation of the realm of created things in order to gain access to that of the uncreated, a more existential liberation involving the whole being of him who would know God. In both cases, it is a question of union, but union with this Greek word of Plotinus can in fact mean a perception of the primordial and ontological union of man with God. In Dionysus, the mystical union is a new condition which implies a progress, a series of changes, a transition from the created to the uncreated, the acquiring of something which man did not hitherto possess by nature. Indeed, not only does he go forth from his own self, for this happens also in Plotinus, but he belongs wholly to the unknowable, being deified in this union with the uncreated. Here, union means deification. At the same time, while intimately united with God, he knows him only as unknowable. In other words, as infinitely set apart by his nature, capital H, remaining even in union inaccessible to that which he is in his essential being. Though Dionysus speaks of ecstasy and of union, though his negative theology, far from being a purely intellectual exercise, involves a mystical experience, an ascent towards God, he makes it nonetheless clear that even though we attain to the highest peaks accessible to created beings, the only rational notion which we can have of God will still be that of his incomprehensibility. Consequently, theology must not be so much a quest of positive notions about the divine being as an experience which surpasses all understanding. It is a great thing to speak of God, but still better to purify oneself for God, says Gregory Nazianzen. Apophaticism is not necessarily a theology of ecstasy. It is above all an attitude of mind, which refuses to form concepts about God.
There you go.
Such an attitude excludes all abstract and purely intellectual theology, which would adapt the mysteries of the wisdom of God to human ways of thoughts. It is an existential attitude which involves the whole man. There is no theology apart from experience. It is necessary to change, to become a new man.
Can we repeat that? There is no theology apart from experience.
Right. It is necessary to change, to become a new man.
Yeah.
Yeah. To know God, one must draw near to him. No one who does not follow the path of union with God can be a theologian. The way of knowledge of God is necessarily the way of deification. He who, in following this path, imagines at a given moment that he has known what God is, has a depraved spirit, according to St. Gregory Nazianzen. Apophaticism is, therefore, a criterion, the sure sign of an attitude of mind conformed to truth. In this sense, all true theology is fundamentally apophatic. Will naturally be asked, what is the function of cataphatic or affirmative theology, the theology of the divine names, which we find made manifest in the order of creation? Unlike the negative way, which is an ascent toward union, this is a way which comes down toward us, a ladder of theophanies, or manifestations of God in creation. It may be said to be one and the same way, which can be followed in two different directions. God condescends toward us in the energies in which he is manifested. We mount toward him in the unions in which he remains incomprehensible by nature. The supreme theophany, the perfect manifestation of God in the world by the incarnation of the Word, retains for us its apophatic character. Quote, in the humanity of Christ, says Dionysius, the super essential was manifested in human substance without ceasing to be hidden after this manifestation, or, to express myself after a more heavenly fashion, in this manifestation itself. The affirmations of which the sacred humanity of Jesus Christ are the object have all the force of the most preeminent negations. So much the more the partial theophanies of inferior degree conceal God in that which he is, whilst manifesting him in that which he is not by nature. The latter of cataphatic theology, which discloses the divine names drawn above all from Holy Scripture, is a series of steps up which the soul can mount to contemplation. These are not the rational notions which we formulate, the concepts with which our intellect constructs a positive science of the divine nature. They are rather images or ideas intended to guide us and to fit our faculties for the contemplation of that which transcends all understanding.
Okay, so that's what I was kind of saying earlier, Iconoclast, is that there's really no dichotomy between apophatic and cataphatic. And cataphatic, what he's describing here are these ideas, these rational notions that formulate in our minds based on images that are of a divine nature that precipitate down to us. So, yeah, there's nothing wrong with them per se, but in terms of a practical method, he's emphasizing letting go of all those concepts.
Yeah, and it's tricky because of the way our Western minds are constructed. You know, we're very, like, I guess you could say, cataphatically oriented in a way, and this way of negation, it's almost alien to us. We're so used to constructing concepts to wrap our minds around something and understand it. And what they're suggesting is that those are actually, in a way, like when you get to the top of this ladder of the cataphatic that they're talking about, it's almost like you have to leap from the top of the ladder into the unknown and the unknowable somehow. That's what I'm gathering from it. It's beyond, like way beyond any concept. But you can use these concepts to, ascend this ladder as well, like Marcus is pointing. On the lower steps especially, these images are fashioned from the material objects least calculated to lead spirits inexperienced in contemplation into error. It is indeed more difficult to identify God with stone or with fire than with intelligence, unity, being, or goodness. What seemed evident at the beginning of the ascent, God is not stone, he is not fire, is less and less so as we attain to the heights of contemplation, impelled by that same apophatic spirit, which now causes us to say, quote, God is not being, he is not the good. At each step of this ascent, as one comes upon loftier images or ideas, it is necessary to guard against making of them a concept, quote, an idol of God. Then one can contemplate the divine beauty itself. God, insofar as he manifests himself in creation. Speculation gradually gives place to contemplation, knowledge to experience. For in casting off the concepts which shackle the spirit, the apophatic disposition reveals the boundless horizons of contemplation at each step of positive theology. Thus, there are different levels in theology, each appropriate to the differing capacities of the human understandings, which reach up to the mysteries of God. In this connection, St. Gregory of Nazianzen takes up again the image of Moses on Mount Sinai. Quote, God commands me to enter within the cloud and hold converse with him. If any be an Aaron, let him go up with me, and let him stand near, be ready, if it must be so, to remain outside the cloud. But if any be a Nadab or an Abihu, or of the order of the elders, let him go up indeed, but let him stand afar off. But if any be of the multitude, who are unworthy of this height of contemplation, if he be altogether impure, let him not approach at all, for it would be dangerous to him. But if he be at least temporarily purified, let him remain below and listen to the voice alone, and the trumpet, the bare words of piety, and let him see the mount smoking and lightning. But if any be an evil and savage beast, and altogether incapable of taking in the matter of contemplation and theology, let him not hurtfully and malignantly lurk in his den amongst the woods, to catch hold of some dogma or saying by a sudden spring, but let him stand yet afar off and withdraw from the mount, or he shall be stoned. This is not a more perfect or esoteric teaching hidden from the profane, nor is it a Gnostic separation between those who are spiritual, psychic, or carnal, but a school of contemplation wherein each receives his share in the experience of the Christian mystery lived by the Church. This contemplation of the hidden treasures of the divine wisdom can be practiced in varying degrees, with greater or lesser intensity, whether it be lifting up of the spirit towards God and away from creatures, which allows his splendor to become visible, whether it be a meditation on a meditation on the Holy Scriptures, in which God hides himself, as it were, behind a screen, beneath the words which express the revelation, so Gregory of Nyssa, whether it be through the dogmas of the Church or through her liturgical life, whether finally it be through the ecstasy that we penetrate to the divine mystery. This experience of God will always be the fruit of that apophatic attitude which Dionysius commends to us in his mystical theology. All that we have said about apophaticism may be summed up in a few words. Negative theology is not merely a theology of ecstasy. It is an expression of that fundamental attitude which transforms the whole of theology into a contemplation of the mysteries of revelation. It is not a branch of theology, a chapter, or an inevitable introduction on the incomprehensibility of God, from which one passes unruffled to a doctrinal exposition in the usual terminology of human reason and philosophy in general. Apophaticism teaches us to see above all a negation of meaning in the dogmas of the Church. Apophaticism teaches us to see above all a negation of meaning in the dogmas of the Church. It forbids us to follow natural ways of thought and to form concepts which would usurp the place of spiritual realities. For Christianity is not a philosophical school for speculating about abstract concepts, but is essentially a communion with the living God. That is why, despite all their philosophical learning and natural bent toward speculation, the fathers of the Eastern tradition, in remaining faithful to the apophatic principle of theology, never allowed their thoughts to cross the threshold of the mystery, or to substitute idols of God for God himself. That is also why there is no philosophy more or less Christian. Plato is not more Christian than Aristotle. The question of the relations between theology and philosophy has never arisen in the East. The apophatic attitude gave the fathers of the Church that freedom and liberality with which they employed philosophical terms without running the risk of being misunderstood or falling into a theology of concepts. Whenever theology is transformed into a religious philosophy, as is the case in Origen, it is always the result of forsaking the apophaticism which is truly characteristic of the whole tradition of the Eastern Church. Unknowability does not mean agnosticism or refusal to know God. Nevertheless, this knowledge will only be attained in the way which leads not to knowledge, but to union, to deification. Thus, theology will never be abstract, working through concepts, but contemplative, raising the mind to those realities which pass all understanding.
Amen. Amen. To
Direct
that.
experience.
Yeah.
This is why the dogmas of the Church often present themselves to the human reason as antinomies. The more difficult to resolve, the more sublime the mystery which they express. It is not a question of suppressing the antimony by adapting dogma to our understanding, but of a change of heart and mind, enabling us to attain the contemplation of the reality which reveals itself to us as it raises us to God and unites us, according to our several capacities, to Him. The highest point of revelation, the dogma of the Holy Trinity, is preeminently an antimony. To attain to the contemplation of this primordial reality in all its fullness, it is necessary to reach the goal which is set before us, to attain the state of deification. For in the words of St. Gregory of Nazianzen, quote, "They will be welcomed by the ineffable light and the vision of the Holy and Sovereign Trinity, uniting themselves wholly to the whole Spirit, wherein alone and beyond all else I take it that the kingdom of heaven consists." The apophatic way does not lead to an absence, to an utter emptiness, for the unknowable God of the Christian is not the impersonal God of the philosophers. It is to the Holy Trinity, superessential, more than divine, and more than good, that the author of the mystical theology commends himself in entering upon the way which is to bring him to a presence and a fullness with which are without measure.
Wow.
Yeah. This guy is pretty good.
Wow. Yeah.
So it's not concepts, Oppenheimer. And I know that seems alien, especially to your intellectual, it's not just you, it's me too. Yeah, us,
Well,
you know.
I did want to ask what he specifically meant by concepts because I see. I promise I'm not trying to be pedantic, right? But it does seem to me that there's perhaps some divergence in the way this word's being used because I hear it used one way, and I assume in this context I must not understand it the way he's using it.
Well, he keeps going back to this direct experience, this like face to face with God. And that in order to come to that the only way is by way of negation, because any concept, any understanding is if one makes the mistake of taking that to be God, then that's actually what they mean by an idol worship. Because it's a created thing. A concept is a created thing. Any thought is a created thing. Okay. Anything that we're used to experiencing in our mind is a created thing.
Okay. So would this also apply to transcendental true things like the things that are mind independent, or as Marcus was talking about earlier at the beginning of the conversation, realism, right? I think that's how he described it. Independent of our perception of it.
Yeah, we can perceive those things. You know, we notice how he says that unknowability does not mean agnosticism. So it's not like he's saying that we can't have the ability to know things. He's saying that the means by which we know things are by removing concepts from our minds.
Okay, so concepts. When he uses that word, and there's that word again, Fletcher.
Those pesky concepts.
So
it was something that Marcus just said that's come up in our conversations pretty frequently. I've already lost it, but when we're talking about concepts, it seems like it's a pretty particular term. Would this be also considered as the product of reasoning? You know, whatever inferences, deductions we make, you know, anything outside of recognition of ontologically true things, any kind of supposition that we arrive at on our own accord, those are the concepts that must be set aside. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Like 30 minutes ago or something, I always go back to the same verses, and that's Galatians 5:16 through 23, and so on. When Paul speaks on walking in the Spirit, and in verses 22 through 23, he focuses on the fruit of the Spirit and mentions there is no law against these.
Well, I think Fletcher, to the point about setting aside concepts, right? I think that's some kind of an intuitive thing to understand. It speaks to the unknowability. It speaks to the fundamental understanding that our own minds can be flawed in their perceptions and their reasoning and the conclusions and all these other things because they're products of a flawed person, ultimately. Oh, shoot, I forgot where I was going with that.
So concepts, Oppenheimer, concepts, like those are things that arise from our memories from previous interactions. We formulate things, we store them in our memory, they come back up, and then we interact with them in the present moment to add perhaps new meaning to them as they arise, right? Those are
Okay.
common. And what this guy is saying is that we gotta like throw all those things into the fire, so to speak, to sit in silence in order to experience God. And I mean, he talks about that. He says that the dogmas of the church often present themselves to the human reason as antinomies. So, posing concepts or things that seem to be contradictory. And that's something that is present throughout all of Scripture. You find paradoxes all throughout Scripture. That's a good thing because it like destroys the mind, basically. It leads you into a state of unknowing, which is
Brings the world to its knees.
yeah.
The world meaning the enemy. Because he doesn't know how to deal with it.
Or is this like this idea of inherent paradox and paradox being a good thing specifically for? I've never heard it described that way. I've always heard it, claimed as this is the case, but never described that way or justified that way. I suppose that makes sense in one way, but the fact that a paradox could be paradoxically good and bad at the same time, in the sense that if it destroys the mind, it kind of look. Maybe I'm wrong on this, but it sounds like God authoring confusion or being less than forthright. If on one hand we're told to seek and ye shall find, knock and it shall be opened, and then on the other, kind of thrown these paradoxical curveballs meant to completely wreck that train of inquiry or thought or pursuit, whatever the case may be. That alone in itself seems paradoxical. I'm not sold on the idea of paradoxes, and it's perhaps because I just haven't studied it from the Orthodox tradition and teaching enough yet. I'm very new to it. But
Well, interestingly enough, God, he's a little bit of a trickster, right? And he does throw these curveballs towards you, and the curveballs are meant to lift you up to participate in him more fully. So his curveballs are, with good intention.
well, I think everything that I like the way you describe that, because I suppose through that lens it would reconcile. It's just like Fletcher and I were talking about earlier. One of the hardest things to do is assume good faith on the part of another, and that's just human to human. That's somebody that you can tangibly touch and see and interact with, like on a physical level, like an empirical level. But it's different. There's a different order of magnitude with a different order of magnitude of being. I'll just put it that way.
There's two thoughts I had throughout that. That's Job and the verse in the New Testament where God sends them strong delusion. Speaking of, like, the reprobate.
At some point, I would like to explore paradox. I gotta split, fellas. I'm whooped. But at some point, I would like to explore paradox. Um, that is something that I find quite intriguing. Heard a couple of you guys that know a lot more than I do. Put it on the table. So much like you saying this, or this idea of limiting God or putting constraints on God or putting God in a box, we have this kind of visceral knee-jerk reaction to. Um, I had the same kind of visceral knee-jerk reaction to paradox. Like, whoa, oh, hold on, what? That can't be true, because God's the foundation and grounding of all epistemology, knowledge, and truth. So, if no, you know,
So just no.
Yeah. I would love to explore that as well. And Iconoclast, I genuinely appreciate you coming on tonight. It was a pleasure, man. So
I've enjoyed it. You know, it's like every other time. It's like every other time in the sense that you often leave deeper in contemplation on a more nuanced topic, wrapped in darkness, shrouded in our ignorance that we cannot possibly understand. And the pursuit of it is the goal. I think that's the victory condition, is to continually pursue it. I think that in a nutshell describes theosis, right?
It's an
I'll
ongoing
tell you.
event. If that's what you mean, I think that it is an ongoing event.
I'll tell you when I find out. Okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, like back to the patriarch Callistos guy who was, saying that this event, this contemplation, is something that happens in a soul that is pregnant with God. So, definitely a transformation being applied and alluded to there.
And Marcus, I've sincerely enjoyed it. Right, it's given me a lot to think on, a lot to mull over, and it's good. It's good cud to chew. Right, it's that filling, satisfying, virtuous pursuit of inquiry, knowledge, understanding. All the things that we're supposed to do.
yeah,
Yep.
it was a pleasure, man. Let's do it again soon. So
I was
Thanks
lost
for
through that
entertaining
conversation. I was
one
lost in the.
Sorry, just I want to say one last thing, and then I'll bounce, guys. I promise. And I do appreciate you entertaining the uh, proposition that I was putting forward in DMs. I appreciate it. I'll fine tune it a little bit and see where it goes, and see what you think of it in rendition 2.
I look forward to 2.0.
Yeah, right on.
Night, fellas.
Good night.
Have a good night.
That's a good book, Marcus. Thank you. For
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Pretty
dude. Yeah. Pretty good.
The next section talks about God as Trinity, so we'll save that for next time. But yeah.
I'm pretty cashed too. It's midnight.
Yeah.
Y'all have a wonderful night. Love and light to everyone.
All right.
God bless,
night,
brother.
well. It was an eventful night. A lot of information, a lot of craziness.
So what's going on now? Not much.
It's, I guess it's wine mom hour now.
Hope everyone has a beautiful weekend ahead of them, you know.
Yep. You
It's,
too.
Thank you, Marcus. You too.
Yo.
Hey, what's up, folks?
Wine mom hour. Let me guess, you're talking about salt.
If anybody has any objections or wants to debate, I'm all ears, okay?
What's going on?
Huh?
What's going on?
No. I just said it's since we're done with the reading, if anybody wants to debate or has some objections, I'm all ears.
I got something off topic that could start something for like a couple seconds probably.
Right.
I was trying to like re-look into something. Who is the chief musician in the Psalms? Because I was curious about that. I've heard people say God, and then I've heard people say it's Asaph, the actual like human chief musician. I don't know if anybody knew.
I mean, if it was in tradition, I think we would know. Like, it would be written. I would assume.
That's what I was thinking. I was gonna quickly try and see if I could just look and see, because if it's like if it is Asaph, then if I look through the Psalms, I should find a psalm. I shouldn't find a psalm that was written by Asaph and says to the chief musician, because it would make no sense for him to write a psalm to himself and say to himself, you know what I mean? So I should quickly be able to find that.
I don't know. So, I mean, we have some third person
Yeah,
writings.
that's true.
Like, people talk to themselves. Like in the KJV, you look at, like Daniel 8:15.
Yeah.
He says,
And I already found one.
even I, Daniel.
Psalm 75, to the chief musician, Al-Takhith, I can't say that name, Al-Takhith, a psalm or song of Asaph. It could, I mean, he could be doing that to himself. It's just a little odd, but yeah.
I mean, when we speak, we use I's and we's and